everyone, this is Miss Moriarty, and I'm here to discuss with us our notes now on the nitrogen cycle. So, kind of similar to our carbon cycle in how, as it cycles through living things, non living things, it potentially changes forms. Nitrogen also does this. So, it can take on a variety of different chemical forms. And the activity that we're going to do tomorrow, you're going to get a chance to kind of see all the different types of forms. Now, where do we normally find nitrogen? Actually, about 76 to 78% or so of our atmosphere is actually comprised of nitrogen. And it is in the N2 or elemental form of nitrogen. But the problem with that is that a lot of living organisms can't actually use nitrogen in that form. So there are many other steps involved in order to change that nitrogen into forms that living organisms can use. Now, we also know that nitrogen is not only found in the atmosphere, it is also found in those macromolecules we've talked about, right? Remember, things like proteins and nucleic acids are macromolecules that not only contain carbon, but they also contain nitrogen as well. We can also find them in fossil fuels, so things like our coal, oil, and so on actually also contain nitrogen as well. So when we combust them, not only do they release carbon dioxide, they can also release other things that contain nitrogen as well, like nitrogen oxides. We can see it in waste, right? When organisms have to expel urine, feces, we see that lots of nitrogen is going to be found in those waste products. And so we tend to see a lot of nitrogen also in the soil. Some of the main stages of nitrogen. So remember how I mentioned before, majority of our atmosphere is made up of nitrogen, but it's in a form that plants and other living organisms can't use. So it has to be changed first. So the first step in the nitrogen cycle is called nitrogen fixation. This is where bacteria that's found in the soil or in water convert nitrogen, that N2 elemental form, into a form that plants can use. Now, how might we get then that nitrogen? We have to consume other organisms or other plants that obtain nitrogen. And so here we see nitrogen fixation, right? Takes our N2 elemental nitrogen and fixes it into a different form. That's typically done by bacteria and on occasion can also be done by lightning. How do other organisms obtain their nitrogen? They do it by eating other organisms that have nitrogen in it. Now, what might happen next? Well, those plants and those animals that contain that nitrogen over time will die. Decomposers found in the soil, kind of similar to our carbon cycle, will break down that dead organic matter and return it to nitrogen in the soil. But here we go again. Here's bacteria. What happens in the soil is bacteria then take that then nitrogen, right, from those dead matter and turn it into ammonia. And this is a process known as ammonification. So here we see decomposers break down dead matter, return nitrogen to the soil, and it is then bacteria found in the soil that take that nitrogen from waste, urine, and feces and turn it into ammonia through the process of ammonification. So what then happens next? Well, now we have all of this ammonia in the soil. But unfortunately, plants can't use ammonia, so it must be changed into another form. And so, another type of bacteria called nitrifying bacteria perform a process known as nitrification that takes that ammonia and it turns it into two different forms that plants can potentially use. That is nitrates and nitrites. These two types of nitrogen compounds can be easily absorbed by plants in their roots. And so this is how nitrogen winds up entering into a food chain and eventually reaches consumers like us. But how does nitrogen then get back up to the atmosphere? Because remember, this is a cycle. Another form of bacteria, known as denitrifying bacteria, take the ammonia that's found in the soil and turn it back into the elemental N2 nitrogen so that it can return back to the atmosphere. So here, remember, in the soil, we have lots of ammonia due to the ammonification process. That ammonia gets changed into nitrates and nitrites that gets taken up through to plants. Those then plants get consumed by other organisms, and that is how they may obtain nitrogen. And nitrogen then returns back to the atmosphere through another form of bacteria known as denitrifying bacteria. And so don't forget, although a lot of the images that you have seen with all of our biogeochemical cycles, they also take place in aquatic environments as well. So we can still see ammonia forming in an ocean or aquatic ecosystem. We still see nitrifying bacteria taking that ammonia and turning it into nitrites and nitrates for plants to then uptake and other consumers to consume. We see that cycle kind of happen all over again. And so, how are living organisms involved in the nitrogen cycle? Well, the nitrogen cycle is kind of different from our other geochemical cycles in that there really is no step that is completed without the help of another living organism. And so we know that bacteria are crucial organisms for the nitrogen cycle, as we could just see, right? We know that there's bacteria that fix the nitrogen from the atmosphere, bacteria that can then turn that into ammonia, bacteria that take that ammonia, turn it into nitrites and nitrates, and even bacteria that return that all the way back to the atmosphere. Now, besides bacteria, though, another organism that is very crucial for our nitrogen cycle are other decomposers like fungi. They help to break down dead material and return that nitrogen rich material back into the soil to then be reused once again. All right, everyone, this is it for our nitrogen cycle video. Tomorrow, we're going to be doing a nitrogen cycle activity and where we will be cycling around the room, taking different forms of nitrogen, and then we will reconvene and discuss the human impacts and disruptions to the nitrogen cycle. So at this point, you should have watched the video, taken notes, and please mark this as done.